On December 8, 2025, President Donald Trump announced that he was allowing Nvidia to sell its second-best chip, the H200, to a select number of Chinese customers.
President Donald Trump on Monday said Nvidia will be allowed to sell its H200 artificial intelligence chips to China.
President Trump allowing Nvidia to sell its H200 chips to China.
High-end H200 chips are getting the green light, but China is set to limit access.
Critics of the move say it compromises national security by giving Beijing access to more powerful computing abilities than it would otherwise be able to produce domestically. Others say that it undermines America's strategic partnerships on export controls. And still others remark that it may not even be legal. Meanwhile, supporters note that the move helps to bring in much-needed revenue, maintain a dominant market share in the advanced chip industry, and stave off China's aggressive push to decouple itself from the US tech stack. Yet, there is something to be said about how important this move really is, especially considering that Beijing might not even accept the deal in the first place. So, why is everyone talking about Trump allowing Nvidia to sell advanced chips to China? Why might it be a bad idea? Who argues that it's a good idea? And why might it not even be that deep? Welcome to Bottom Line Upfront. Today is December 14th, 2025. I'm Noah Tan, and this is BLUF number 6, chipping away at the export control regime. Just this past week, the Trump administration announced that it would allow Nvidia to sell its second-best chip to China, the H200. This chip is a major step up from Washington's previously rejected offer to Beijing of the H20 chip. As part of the arrangement, Nvidia will be allowed to sell H200 chips to certain approved customers and will pay the US government 25% of its revenue for the sales. This move has sparked both praise and criticism from tech executives, policymakers, and scholars alike. But what is so important about this, and why has this sparked such a debate in international security circles? First, what is an H200 chip, and why is it important? The Nvidia H200 chip is an advanced graphics processing unit used for high-performance computing. These chips are essential to support AI workloads and large language models. Before the Trump administration licensed the sale of H200 chips to China, it offered Beijing a sale of specially designed H20 chips, a downgraded version of the H200 chip that was over 6 times less powerful. China rejected that watered-down alternative on the basis that Commerce Secretary Lutnick's statements that China would only get America's 4th best chip were insulting. The bottom line is this: the H200 chip has faster processors and allows for larger workspace memories, which is indispensable in meeting AI training and inference demands. First, let's talk about the people who think this might be a bad idea. The first camp is national security concerns camp. Policymakers against the H200 chip license argue that these advanced chips are indispensable components for training the vast, data-intensive models required for modern military applications, warning about how the dual-use nature of the H200 can abet the People's Liberation Army's civil-military fusion. A joint statement by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee warns that this move would be a, quote, colossal economic and national security failure, end quote, highlighting how, quote, the H200s are vastly more capable than anything China can make, and gifting them to Beijing would squander America's primary advantage in the AI race. Among other national security advantages China would acquire, access to H200 chips could supercharge targeting on its kinetic weapon systems, enable more effective cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, and about triple domestic aggregate computing power in China in the coming year. All of these advantages combined would significantly narrow the technological gap that is critical to Washington's dominance in frontier AI over Beijing. Then we turn to the strategic partnership concerns. The announcements to allow the sale of H200 chips is a departure from the Biden-era policy of small yard, high fence, which calls upon key allies with access to AI development choke points to restrict the more advanced semiconductor technology to China. This announcement serves as a signal to American partners that national security technologies are negotiable for profit. The policy undermines U.S. efforts to convince partner nations such as the Netherlands and Japan to maintain and strengthen their own export controls on advanced chip-making equipment. allies may become unwilling to restrict their exports of critical manufacturing tools, thereby jeopardizing the entire multinational restriction regime. The Netherlands, specifically the Dutch company ASML, has a crucial role in providing the extreme ultraviolet lithography processes required to produce advanced AI chips. Meanwhile, Japan is an important player in much of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing, which is also subject to export controls. Any sign that the mutual agreement to deny certain high-tech exports to China can be bought justifies concerns that the Netherlands, Japan, and other important allies may ease export controls for the same reason. Finally, in the critics' camp, we have the people who are concerned about the Constitution. Critics of the H200 license bring up legal concerns regarding adherence to the Constitution in its Article 1, Section 9, Clause 5 prohibition on export taxes. Because of the 25% revenue sharing model, which requires American chip companies to cede a quarter of their revenue on H200 Chinese chip sales to the US government, many argue that this acts as a tax on the export of H200 chips. Now, the Trump administration could argue that this revenue sharing model is not a tax, but rather an export fee or condition imposed by statutes like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. You've often heard IEEPA brought up in the news as a justification for Trump's tariffs in the ongoing trade war with China. However, as previous revenue sharing negotiations have led to compromises on the exact percentage of revenue going to the government, this measure is likely designed for maximizing revenue, not solely for regulatory control. This negotiated revenue extraction thus makes the measure susceptible to judicial challenge as an unconstitutional export tax. Okay, so we've heard from the critics, but what about the proponents of this idea? What do they say about why these sales might actually be a good idea? In the first camp, we have the financial benefits for American companies camp. Opening up advanced chip sales to the Chinese market comes with major financial benefits for American tech companies. Reports estimate that H200 sales to China could generate massive revenues to the tune of $10 billion. Not only will these sales generate increased revenue streams, but they will also help to stave off market competition from foreign competitors. Next, we have the argument that H200 sales will help to maintain US technological hegemony. Much of the appeal of Nvidia chips in China is not the chips themselves, but also the access to Nvidia's software ecosystem that comes along with them. Nvidia's proprietary software platform, the Compute Unified Device Architecture, or CUDA, has been the default platform for technological development over the past 2 decades. So for Chinese tech firms, switching away from Nvidia means undergoing a costly and time-consuming migration, rewriting vast amounts of existing code, abandoning established CUDA libraries, and adapting to nascent, immature domestic platforms like Huawei's MindSpore or CANN. By allowing the sale of the H200, the US attempts to keep Chinese developers firmly anchored into the CUDA stack, preventing China from building its future AI infrastructure entirely outside the American-controlled software standard. Finally, there are those that say this H200 chip sale helps to stave off the threat of domestic substitution. Back in August 2025, China was already compelling its companies to use domestically produced chips instead of the H20s being proposed by the Trump administration. Beijing's rationale for rejecting the H20 chip was that the performance bump it gave compared to Huawei's Ascend chip was too modest to justify continued reliance on US parts. Now with the full H200 offering, American tech companies may have the point that the sale of a much more powerful chip will help to capture more market share and mitigate the incentive for Chinese tech companies to turn towards domestic alternatives. Such a domestic pivot could allow them to build out a self-reliant AI ecosystem that narrows the technological advantage between frontier Nvidia chips and the current Chinese frontier chip, the Ascend 910C, which is about 30% less powerful than the H200. So yes, there is a lot of justifiable concern that the sale of H200 chips to China might spell doom for America's export controls and technological advantage. But, there's others out there that say it actually might not matter that much, and it may not be that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. While the type of semiconductor is important for AI workloads, it is equally important to consider the aggregate computing power that China has. Some analysts suggest that the Trump administration may not be ready to open the floodgates entirely for H200 chips, instead opting to sell a limited amount to a set of approved customers. Furthermore, though the H200 offers China a significant spec bump that Chinese fabs would not be able to achieve until around late 2027, it is still quite far behind the frontier of Nvidia's Blackwell series and newly developing Rubin series of semiconductor. And finally, there are people out there saying, hey, China might not even want these chips. There remains the question of whether China will even accept the deal. Recent reports state that China is yet again rejecting proposed Nvidia chip sales from the US. White House AI czar David Sachs said in a recent interview that, quote, "They're rejecting our chips. Apparently, they don't want them." China has recently released a list of government-approved hardware suppliers, known as the Xinchuang list, designed to mandate that public sector organizations, ministries, and state-owned companies prioritize locally developed processors. This list currently includes only domestic suppliers like Huawei and Cambricon, explicitly excluding foreign entities such as Nvidia and AMD. Since the state sector controls billions of dollars in annual hardware spending, this policy functions as a potent non-tariff barrier, severely limiting the potential market for the H200. The Xinchuang list and rejection of American advanced chips are not all that surprising. In April 2025, Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized, quote, self-reliance and self-strengthening, end quote, to decouple from the US technology stack and focus on domestic development. Not only is it a matter of pride for China to meet its AI demands through its own technology, but it is also a matter of strategic self-sufficiency. Look, the main point is that there exists a delicate balance that both Washington and Beijing are attempting to strike. Washington is weighing maintaining market share in advanced chips and discouraging Chinese alternatives against very real national security concerns over giving China chips that are more powerful than those it could produce indigenously. Beijing, on the other hand, is weighing the short-term goals of accelerating its AI development and adoption strategy with the longer-term objective of outpacing the US with its own technology. From my viewpoint, we should keep an eye out for how many H200 chips Beijing agrees to purchase, if any at all. This will be a key barometer as to how confident China feels about the strategy it has pursued, as well as whether Nvidia is actually the bargaining chip Washington thought it would be. This has been Bottom Line Upfront. Bottom Line Upfront is written entirely outside of Noah's professional capacity. His views are not necessarily representative of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace or Stanford University. Noah declares no conflicts of interest. All errors are his own. Thanks for listening.